We finally got around to it. Fable Anniversary. The 2014 re-release of the 2004 title Fable, the original Fable game, expanded with the Lost Chapters. Now, as you may know, I experienced the Fable franchise in total reverse. I started with Fable 3, don't ask why, I just did, then I played Fable 2, and then eventually I got around to playing Fable Anniversary. Being the remastered version of Fable the Lost Chapters rather than straight Fable 1, some may see that as heresy, but honestly, the remaster existed, so obviously I was going to play that version. For the most part, besides the visual improvements and the fact that it has the Lost Chapters elements in there, Fable Anniversary and Fable are effectively the same game. So a few weeks back I took to the YouTube community tab to ask people who have played the Fable games which Fable game was their favourite. Of course, I didn't include the option for not having played any Fable title, because simply put that's just not the data I'm trying to quantify, is it? And by a landslide, the favourite was Fable 2. Yes, I'd love to know who the 4% who chose Fable the Journey are too. But the second favourite, by not even close, was Fable 1/Fable Anniversary. So on average, people like this game more than Fable 3 at least. But according to my meaningless poll at least, Fable 2 appears to be the fan favourite, and I can see why. But I actually think that Fable 1, or more accurately Fable Anniversary, might just be the better game. First and foremost, I can play it on PC, which is always nice. Secondly, the in-game combat actually has meaningful challenge because you can die. Fable 1 also has a present antagonist who actually kind of feels like a threat, and the in-game economy isn't anywhere near as f***ing broken as the other two games. It's not my favourite of the Fable trilogy, but I honestly think there's no better baseline for a benchmark for what Fable should really be about than where it all began. Especially with a new Fable on the horizon, this game probably represents best what I think I'd like to see, combined with certain elements from the other games of course, and hopefully I can explain why I think that in this video. So please enjoy yet another Fable video with an inflammatory title, so that in failing being interested in watching the actual contents, people still click on it just to comment mad shit. Or maybe the title does have substance, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Unlike Fable 2 and 3, Fable 1 doesn't start with a simple choice. I mean, you can choose whether or not resurrection files are in the game, and that's kind of it, but we begin as a young lad living in the village of Oakvale, and our father has instructed us to go off and get our sister a birthday present. But of course, he's not going to make it simple for us. For every good deed we perform, he will give us 1 gold piece, and we need 3 to purchase a present. At this point, you have to do the good deeds to progress, but there is nothing stopping you from chinning this little girl. You can even punch your own dad.
Don't you dare hit your own father. You need to watch that temper, lad, or you'll get yourself in trouble.
There's no real consequence to being bad, though, at this point. You might get accosted by a guard that looks disturbingly like Boris Johnson.
Violent conduct towards a person or persons without guard's permission.
And sounds a bit like him too, but that's kind of it. Every time you perform a bad deed this early though, all that happens is the guards come along and give you a slap on the wrist. So, I punched the guard.
What the blazes do you think you're doing? I'm a town guard. I'm not the sort you want to be hitting, unless you want to spend a night in the barracks. Now, get out of my sight.
Besides this, we can progress through some bad deeds here. In order for our father to give us the gold, we need to perform good deeds. However, we can acquire the gold another way. Some of the good deeds that we have to do have a more evil and reprehensible alternative that allows us to obtain the gold by another means. So instead of just punching a bully and then punching his victim for good measure, there are actually story-weaved ways for us to be bastards. For example, we can help a woman find and discover her cheating husband, or we can accept a bribe from the cheating husband of 1 gold piece to not say anything.
Who is she anyway? Some tart from the village? Younger than me, is she?
You know I only have eyes for you, my sweet.
You filthy swine! I ought to chop them right off. Don't mustn't insult me anymore!
But after we've amassed 3 gold pieces, we can finally purchase a gift for Teresa from this guy with a weird mustache. Some lovely chocolates. Oh, f*** off, Boris, I've got places to be. Teresa is chuffed with the chocolates, but unfortunately she's not going to get a chance to eat them. Bandits attack the village and now everything is on fire. Just in case you forgot the bandits were here, you know? Of course everything's on fire. Dad's a bit dead and that's kinda peak. And then a bandit tries to attack us but is swiftly killed by a magical guy with runes on his face. And he teleports us away from this place.
I thought you'd have a stronger stomach than that. Come on.
And he takes us to the Heroes Guild to begin our training for seeking revenge.
My name is Maze, and I'm the head of the Guild of Heroes. You must have heard of it.
It's a to-the-point, very quick introduction. It's not quite over yet because we've got some training to undergo, but it does move along quite swiftly, and it makes sense more so for a character-driven narrative, of which this certainly is not, to take its time more with an introduction, whereas with a game like Fable, it's just a loose roundabout explanation for why we're doing what we're doing in the game, and it doesn't even have to make too much sense. For example, Oakvale just got obliterated by bandits, but only 5 minutes prior, there were guards everywhere. What were they doing? Honestly, Fable making too much sense would be a nightmare, because not only is it a franchise of bite-sized RPGs that are quite fun to play, it's also quite light-hearted and doesn't take itself too seriously. Though the humorous aspects to Fable are much more pronounced in Fable 2 and 3. So the humorous aspect to revisiting the limited technology of games from bygone eras doesn't cheapen Fable 1 as much as revisiting early entries to other franchises that take themselves far more seriously might. But as for the next portion of the narrative, if you will, it introduces us to the concept of the Heroes Guild, which in later Fable installments is largely fashioned as a guild of powerful warriors from a bygone era, and though heroes exist in these games because you play as one in both Fable 2 and 3, the guild itself is long gone. In Fable 1, the Heroes Guild is still very much so around, and the place has an air of over-the-top cocksure arrogance that I honestly couldn't say if it was intentional, but it's really fitting when you consider A, the base concept of Fable, and B, the idea that the Heroes Guild is going to disappear before the events of Fable 2 and 3. With that sort of lore direction in mind, it makes sense to show the cracks in a guild so grand as this. But besides that, having the Heroes Guild be very much still a thing, it makes Fable 1 stand apart from 2 and 3 as well, which is also appreciated. Anyway, this is where we're introduced to the game's combat, but joke's on you, Fable. I got started on Whisper, a bollocking from Maze later, and we're back to it. The combat in Fable 1 is relatively straightforward. You swing your weapon and hit things. When enemies die, they drop glowing green orbs, and that serves as experience that you need to gather to progress.
These orbs contain the knowledge gained from killing the creature. It's very important that you collect these orbs, or you won't learn anything.
I love semi-fourth wall breaking explanations for things in games that, if it wasn't a video game, would make no sense whatsoever. But effectively, in order to progress and level up, we need to collect these orbs, otherwise we just won't be able to. And you can invest that into various different things that turn you from a scrawny little boy into wham as f***. So the Guildmaster sends us to scrap some beetles, which honestly takes no time whatsoever, so we get some proper dynamic practical combat experience. Swinging sticks and hitting things is a rather straightforward, albeit simple method, and then we get asked if we wish to leave childhood behind and begin our apprentice training, which is a little bit ominous when you frame it like that. Anyway, now that we've hit puberty, we're finally ready to fight with a real sword. And finally, we get to fight Whisper. So Whisper gets absolutely clattered, and then this guy shows up. Turns out that's Whisper's brother, and he's getting front row seats to watching his sister get demolished. I've always found Thunder's freakishly large frame and goofy walk hilarious. Off he goes again. But we've got to move on and touch down on the other aspects of the combat. The melee is a straightforward block-hit-dodge system, so to provide depth, and by that I mean ranged combat too, we also have archery. You can fire arrows automatically by simply locking onto your foes, but you can also aim, which is very nice. And it's not just because, unlike in later Fable installments, the aim system in this is more freehand, which means you can miss. You need to very manually aim at your target, but also because the lock-on system in Fable Anniversary at least is a little bit broken. And by that I mean 90% of the time it works great and fine. Other times it locks onto nothing 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So once archery training is done, we learn to wield will, or magic, and honestly the way in which you're taught this is kind of erratic. And these three elements together, melee, archery and will, make for a rather straightforward, albeit competent and enjoyable combat system. The only thing I would say about it is, as you progress into the later stages of the game, the enemy archetypes, or should I say more accurately, the combination of enemy archetypes, become a little bit too complex for that system to truly thrive, and things become a hack and slash clusterfuck. That might be because I chose the Fable 2 and 3 control scheme, because those are the games that I'm more familiar with, so adding that familiarity might have aided me, but I hear that makes certain controls a little bit weird, such as flourishes that you can perform once you build up a meter. The game seldom registers that you do that because it's the same button held as is regular attack, and sometimes that might just cause you to do a regular attack that gets blocked, and sometimes as a result you'll find you've lost your opportunity to perform a flourish. On a more positive note, the game has a great diversity of enemy archetypes as well as weapons for us to experiment with to find what playstyle actually suits us, whether we prefer something heavy and powerful or something light and quick. And then on top of that, we need to figure out how to balance applying physicality, skill and will to most effectively take down an enemy. But the biggest positive of all with regards to Fable 1/Anniversary's combat is when you compare it to Fable 2 and 3. You can actually die in this game. Dying is the only way that a game's combat system can actually be challenging, because otherwise you can just hack and slash your way through anything. No matter how many times you get knocked down, you can always get back up. And whilst Fable 2 and 3 take away experience as a punishment for getting knocked out, and that might hamper your efforts to progress, you'll still get through any combat scenario eventually. So one could argue in that setting there's no real emphasis on balancing the combat system whatsoever. In Fable Anniversary, it isn't necessarily much better. You can play with resurrection files and you can collect up to 9 of them and carry them around, and basically they'll get used to resurrect you when you die, but you can run out of them, meaning at the very least you have to pay some attention, and in failing that, if you want to not pay attention, you have to go out of your way to collect the resurrection files, which of course you can buy from shops and it costs a bit of in-game currency. And if you cock up really badly, you can still die. Or you can play the game on the harder setting that doesn't have these resurrection files, so you really do actually have to pay attention to the combat. And on top of that, other systems like progression and acquiring better weapons to make the experience easier. And while Fable Anniversary isn't an especially hard game, it's good that there are systems there that prevent the game from being unnecessarily easy. But I think I've expressed this in my other Fable videos. In this next new Fable that they're making at Playground Games, we need to be able to die in combat for sure. Anyway, to graduate from hero school, we need to slap Maze up, and now we're officially a hero. I feel like the best way to describe being a hero in the Fable franchise is like it's a mixture of being a Witcher and a Jedi. You're a part of a somewhat arrogant magical order, but you also venture the lands taking quests that often result in you getting paid, but being a hero constitutes infinite amounts more piss-taking. So the comparison is terrible, but I felt like saying it. And it deviates further in the sense that the morality system is accounted for. You can be a good, benevolent individual, or you can be an evil sack of poop, and there's no real doctrine that says you must be one or the other, and those choices crop up on occasion. For the time being, we need to go out into the world and do some quests. The open world of Fable 1, or at least Anniversary, feels a touch more expansive than in the other two games. In those games, you've got key locations and you just travel between them with a loading screen. Whereas in this, there are several areas between one location and another, meaning you have to traverse more of the world and interact with more of it as you go. And though these areas aren't massive, in total, including settlements, there are about 80 odd, which is a lot compared to the amount of individual areas you can visit in Fable 2 and 3, at least before you take into consideration the interiors in those games that help even it out. And whilst this effect is mostly an illusion, because like I said, these areas are quite small, and the differences between them are gradual at best, so a lot of places feel the exact same, it helps make the open world actually feel a bit open. Obviously, in a newer Fable game, I can't imagine there being loading screens between one location and the next, which would open up the world space infinitely and make the open world of whatever the next Fable is feel more expansive if that's the route they go through, and by extension perhaps more modern. The only hope is that they don't overdo it to the point where the open world is too large to have any degree of depth. But I also like the natural choke points in smaller individual areas. I find that Fable's world design actually kind of suits it. Full open worlds are particularly tricky. You can typically go anywhere at any time, therefore as you level up, the open world has to level up with you, and that can often cheapen the sense of progression in your immersion. What Fable does instead is as you progress, more areas begin to open up to you that weren't open before. A good example is early on in the game, you're only able to visit Bowerstone South, but later on, you can visit the more elite quarters of the city. However, if you try to go to Bowerstone North too early, Boris Johnson will stop you. You're a peasant, you need to work your way up to get there. There are a lot of places that only really open up when you get to certain points in the main story, at which point you've probably got immensely stronger and you feel the sense of progression as you navigate the world. The point I'm trying to make is I don't think it's worth going completely full open world for Fable, but rather applying the Fable trilogy setup to a modern game, which might mean loads of these areas like we've seen in Fable so far, or simply several larger open spaces that gradually open up as you go through the story. And in order to progress as far as your abilities are concerned, you need to routinely return to the guild with all of your experience points, head to this spot and then level up your physical abilities, your skill abilities, and your magical abilities. If you neglect to level up your skill abilities, you'll find yourself being really stocky and really short. But Fable puts a fair bit of emphasis on ensuring you level up all three categories because you are going to need them. I suppose that means there isn't much variety with regards to playstyles, but I suppose it works in ensuring the game remains balanced. Onto side content, you'll find yourself doing an awful lot of it earlier on in the game, a lot of which can be picked up from quest cards in the guild. Others can be found more organically in the open world, or at least as organically as possible.
Hello there. I don't think you've met my daughter, have you? She's rather lovely, if I say so myself, though a bit fussy. She's keen to meet strong, handsome men like you.
Do I want to meet Beardy Baldy's daughter? Yeah, go on then.
Ah, that's good news. I think she was starting to get a bit lonely. Thing is, she only likes men whose hair looks like the picture on this card. Maybe if you looked like that, she'd let me introduce you to her. Come and find me when you're ready. I won't be far away.
What in the actual RPG nonsense fuck? Fable can get away with that to a greater degree than other franchises because it never actually takes itself that seriously. Sure, there's a simplistic hero story at its heart, but Fable as a franchise is defined by its goofiness and otherwise dry sense of humour, and regardless of where in this game you're up to, it's rarely not present. My favourite example in Fable 1, or should I say Fable Anniversary because that's the version that I played, is the hero titles. As you amass renown, you can start garnering cooler hero titles such as Reaper. However, early in the game you can find some really bad ones such as Chicken Chaser. And there are certain moments where this name gets used in dialogue. You can purchase these titles at hero title vendors, and my favourite of the lot has to be Arseface. Arseface, as you can imagine, is the greatest hero of all time. There are still emotes such as farting and things, and there's no real shortage of funny dialogue, but I find that developed to become more self-aware in Fable 2 and 3. Fable 1's dialogue, and though I wouldn't call it subtle, is certainly more subtle than Fable 2 and 3 in how it provides that amusing tone. And I think the next Fable could benefit from a mixture of blatantly absurd dialogue delivered with sincerity and the sarcastic, almost fourth wall breaking jests, because there's certainly a place for both approaches.
Hello, mate. Nice bandit gear.
As a result of Fable's playful philosophy, it allows us to, regardless of our morality decisions, treat the game as just a bit of fun, keeping decisions light-hearted even when, if applied to the real world, would be utterly abhorrent. And that's something that remains consistent across the Fable trilogy, as in every single game, for no reason whatsoever, you can punt a chicken. If you did that in the real world, you would get battered by absolutely everybody with a conscience, but it's a game, so who cares? The humour in this execution is just emphasis on the fact that nothing you're seeing is actually real, just go have fun. The world is your oyster, and that sums up Fable's mentality perfectly, because your decisions impact the world, but it's done so in such a way that you don't feel compelled necessarily to go in one moral direction or another. Just do what you think will entertain you best, and Fable's humour will do the rest. You can be good or you can be evil, completely conscience-free. However, you can't really crash the economy in this game. In Fable Anniversary, you can only purchase and rent out designated buildings, rather than in Fable 3, where you can purchase every building in Albion and quite literally monopolise money. You also can't do jobs in Fable Anniversary. And whilst I find how Fable 2 and 3 construct their economy to be amusing, this system probably works out to Fable Anniversary's benefit, as it requires you to use more manual inputs that actually require paying attention, such as buying goods in a place where it's populous and then selling those goods in a place where it's far less common. Or you could simply engage with actual quests. There are other open world activities, such as board games. The iconic demon doors, their puzzles and rewards, never fail to at the very least amuse, but perhaps the most pointless, albeit nice thing in this game's environment is the fact that you can hire a bodyguard. Yeah, for some reason, this cocktail of self-loathing, steroids and tangfastics needs a bodyguard. Gaze at the Union Jack underpants. Find secrets and treasure throughout the open world. Pull a sword from stone to demonstrate the extent of your crippling steroid addiction. Simply put, Fable Anniversary is a very enjoyable time. You've probably noticed I haven't talked story in the best part of over 10 minutes, and that's probably because the main narrative is a relatively enjoyable and interesting tale, but it is quite simple. So after a while of doing hero bollocks, we're told to head to Oakvale and meet with Maze. I forgot to mention you can sponsor a guard's break, which does absolutely nothing. You just lose a gran. Upon arrival, we meet with this woman who was also this kid who we punched, and that triggers an episode of PTSD, but it's alright because I get the feeling that traumatized is this character's constant state of being. Anyway, Maze takes us down to the beach where he tells us that he's got a lead on the whereabouts of our sister, perhaps, and that there's a blind seer in a bandit camp, and maybe she will be able to illuminate our path. Considering our sister's called Teresa, and I played Fable 3 and 2 in that order well before I ever played this game, I could see this coming a mile away. So I head to the bandit camp where you have to sneak past some bandits in this broken stealth system.
Intruders, shut the gate!
So I sat behind this rock and then darted for the gate the first opportunity that I got. Then I slapped up some bandits and acquired a bandit disguise, got complimented on my bandit disguise, and snuck into the camp. Job's a good one. Nothing's going to stand between me and the blind seer now.
You're not going anywhere. We're at a bandit's residence pass.
Are you taking the piss? As it turns out, I need to head to the tavern and play a board game with this man. It relies heavily on memory. Specifically short-term memory. Now, my long-term memory is pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. My short-term memory, however, is shocking. So now that I've proved that I don't have Alzheimer's, this fancy fool gives me his bandit's residence pass. Nothing will stand between me and the blind seeress now.
Boss told me to look after this area. He's having a party, and that includes not letting anyone through this door, apart from the hostages providing the entertainment. And that's what I'm gonna do. Got it?
Never mind. So of course, I free the hostages, use them as a distraction. Now all the guards are chasing them, and I can just blast through the gate, no problems whatsoever. Of course though, Twinblade, the leader of the bandit camp, expects me. So now I have to fight this tosser. I must say I do enjoy a good boss fight, even if you're just analysing a very simple enemy attack pattern. I also find Fable's affinity for comically large burly men hilarious. With Twinblade now formally finessed, the blind seeress reveals herself to be Teresa. What are the odds? She does a thing to us and then dips, leaving us with a choice to either kill or leave Twinblade alive. With that quest now complete, I didn't feel it was in my best interest to just simply loiter in the bandit camp, so I returned to the Heroes Guild and made myself Whammer. Before we crack on with the rest of the story, we need to amass a little bit more renown, which of course can be done rather quickly by completing quests. That way we can participate in the Witchwood Arena, and of course there's some largely unrelated stuff to do along the way, such as slapping up bandits, Balverines, and putting an end to the tenacious White Balverine. Ooh, Knothole Glade. I remember this place from the Fable 2 expansion, or at least I presume it's meant to be the same place. But with all that taken care of, we're finally fit and famous enough to fight in the arena. My sword is quite literally on fire. I am ready. So in the arena, we need to fight through 8 waves of enemies of increasing difficulty. It seems rather straightforward at first, but it very quickly bogs you down. But if you're a sucker for this game's combat, then you'll be having the time of your life. At least until Whisper shows up, who is sort of your rival. But together you fight through waves and waves of foes, and honestly it does feel a little bit like it takes forever. But regardless, it is massively enjoyable, even if at times it can be a little bit of a mess. And by that I mean the game's combat really lacks the framework for fighting 2 trolls at once, but you know what, I'll take the effort. And after the final round is concluded and we are victorious, although we scuffed it the entire way, a geezer named Jack of Blades shows up and proposes one final round. Us against Whisper, in a fight to the death. Whisper is a little bit tougher than earlier in the game here, but not to a point of difficulty. So once again she gets absolutely clarted. So we get the choice to kill or spare her life. And whilst putting an end to Whisper once and for all is enticing, I'm a good boy. So we simply leave, where we see a statue of our mother. As it turns out, she was a hero and a champion of the arena, as we're told by Jack of Blades, the most trustworthy looking man of all time. I'm sorry, you can see this antagonist coming a mile away. Look at the state of his face. These are the eyes of a man who has seen some shit. But regardless, for the time being, he seems pleasant enough, so I'm sure we won't have to kill him later. Outside the arena, we're told by a bandit to meet Teresa at a place called the Grey House. Teresa tells us it was Jack of Blades who burnt down our house and cut out her eyes. And he's holding our mother prisoner at Bargate Prison, which means we're going to have to embark on a rescue mission. But not before getting distracted by this funky looking haunted house. Treasure, but without a dog telling you it's there. Result. It's a bit of a shocker that Jack of Blades is the main antagonist though. He looks really trustworthy. Anyway, in order to discover a secret passage into the prison, we need to speak with a man named the Archaeologist. Of course it's in a graveyard full of reanimated skeletons, because why wouldn't it be? We gain access to a germophobic demon door that leads us into the prison. We do have to fight a fairly decent number of hollow men though, but that's fine, and now we're in prison. Yay. I am now murdering these guards, who are simply doing their job. Eventually we find Mother and free her. That was easy. However, Jack of Blades himself anticipated this and stops us. Now we really are in prison. Certainly not an ideal turn of events, but I'm sure it will work out. So the guards force us and other prisoners to race each other. The winner gets rewarded, and the losers get tortured. Sounds very reasonable. Anyway, I was well ahead until the very last bit where I got very confused and went in the wrong direction. So I got tortured. So as a result, I got to spend a year in prison before finally winning the race and escaping. But not before freeing all of my prisoner brethren who might have actually committed real crimes. With my army of convicts, we batter a guard, get my weapons and armor back, and free my mother. Freedom has never been so tentacle. But once we've properly escaped, I return to the Heroes Guild and get Whammer again. We're sent to the Isle of Hook Coast, where I discover an exploit that allowed me to gain the maximum amount of experience needed to gain every single physical skill and magical attribute. This Banshee or Wraith thingy kept respawning behind this well, and every single time you kill it, you gain a fair chunk of experience. And considering you can one-hit it, that was not especially demanding in the slightest. So I just did that for a very long time.
Meathead Supreme reporting for duty!
So the reason why Jack of Blades is now our sworn enemy that I did fail to mention, that Teresa explained earlier, and the reason why I didn't mention it is because I'm dense and I was too busy thinking about going to prison. But it is important to the narrative, so the second best time to explain what that reason is whilst I rinse this exploit that I discovered. Basically, Jack of Blades ordered the attack on Oakvale in order to capture our family. Why? Because we share a bloodline with the ancient Archons, so access to that blood would allow Jack of Blades to recover the Sword of Eons, a weapon blessed with the power of all, albeit, which was used by William Black in the days gone by to destroy Jack thousands of years prior. I'm not massively understanding of the lore, and I will not pretend that I am. But Jack of Blades is effectively an ancient, malevolent being. And yeah, so far he's proving to be a rather compelling villain with no shortage of presence, which is something that Fable 2 and 3 kind of lack. So from the perspective of somebody who played the other 2 Fable games first, it is always quite refreshing to play Fable Anniversary, Fable 1, The Lost Chapters, whatever you want to say, because no other Fable antagonist really has the gravitas that Jack of Blades does, and that shines through even the goofy design limitations of this game. So props to Lionhead Studios for that one. I can't wait to fold him like a deck chair. But my combo meter thingy has now hit 69, so I can now move on a satisfied man. As it turns out, Maze has betrayed us and captured Teresa on behalf of Jack of Blades, which is ideal because being the man who brought us to the Heroes Guild to begin with, we're supposed to feel that betrayal. However, it's hard to feel any attachments to a man who sounds like the male voice on Google Maps. But thanks to Maze's efforts, Jack of Blades now has the septimal key, whatever that means. But anyway, now we have to kill Maze for his betrayal. And so the student becomes the master. One emotional text-to-speech sounding death later, and it's time to move on. Cinnabit Maze. As a reward, we receive Maze's clasp, and to be honest, that's a kind of suspect sounding thing. Returning to the guild, we discover we need to act quickly. The guild master tells us that Jack is trying to activate the ancient focus sites across Albion, and we must stop him. Hey look, it's that character who only showed up earlier once to belittle us. To cut a long story short, we're late to the punch all 4 times and Jack manages to activate all 4 of the focus sites. And as insult to injury, he captures our mother. Again. Upon returning to the guild, we find the occasional bookshelf on fire, and the guildmaster in a state that one could best describe as haggard. So Jack, Teresa and our mother are in the temple thing under the guild, where he kills our mother, and then he has the blood so he can acquire the sword. And now we have to engage Jack in a final battle, and if you don't level up your will here, you are going to get twisted up badly. So if your spells are doing 5 damage a second, you're in trouble. Even with Resurrection Files, which is the easier difficulty of the 2 you can choose from, this fight is quite the challenge, but if you bench press enough, you should be fine, and Jack of Blades will fall defeated. And all that remains is a choice to keep this all-powerful sword and be as powerful as Jack dreamt of being, or simply destroy it. So I chose to destroy it because I assumed that's the morally righteous thing to do.
They're both where they belong now, lost forever.
Famous last words. So Teresa disappears and we get to keep Jack of Blades' mask as a reward, and I'm led to believe that originally this is where Fable 1 ended. It's rather abrupt, but it's the end to a hero's tale in which we go from a helpless young boy to a world-renowned hero who saved Albion from certain darkness. However, this is not the end because this is Fable Anniversary. We still have the lost chapters to do. Basically, it's an expansion to the ending of Fable 1 that takes place a year after Jack of Blades' defeat. It basically expands the ending of the story, which the ending in original Fable 1 appears to have been quite abrupt based on what I've seen in Fable Anniversary. It also has greater involvement of more characters from the main story who only really show up fleetingly, such as Briar Rose, whose only real memorable interaction is this.
You must be the kid Maze is always talking about. Can't imagine what he sees in you. Still, I suppose Maze knows best. But where are my manners? I'm Briar Rose. No doubt you've heard of me. No time for autographs, I'm afraid. I have to get to Knothole Glade for an important mission. Speaking of which, if you came for a quest card, all the best ones have gone already. I'm sure the guild can find you something to do, though. I hear the kitchens need cleaning.
An ancient hero named Scythe contacts the guild and claims an ancient evil has arisen in the Northern Wastes. So we need to go there to investigate and put a stop to it. And on top of that, a demon door at the guild has awakened this morning. So bearing the mask of Jack of Blades, we pay it a visit and it claims we're worthy and lets us through. Inside we find a handful of fellas imprisoned in what appear to be ice crystals of some description, and we need to solve a relatively simple puzzle to free them. As straightforward as it is, I like aspects like this because they are unique from the rest of the game. And with that done, we're now in possession of the Fire Heart, whatever that is. And now it's time to venture forth to the Northern Wastes. But apparently throwing away the Sword of Aeons wasn't the best idea on my part. But coming from Briar Rose, that statement has about as much credibility as a wet paper towel. So we venture to Hook Coast, where we have our first encounter with a summoner. As far as melee is concerned, they're a rather tricky enemy archetype, but if you rely on ranged weaponry, they're relatively straightforward to beat. The Master's Crossbow makes short work of most things, and that isn't different here. But other enemy archetypes that have showed up previously give us a good idea as to what's actually going on. We summon a spooky ghost ship from the depths that takes us to the Northern Wastes. Upon our arrival, we have a massive beard, which is very nice, and we venture forth in search of answers. And it doesn't take long before we find out what's going on. Jack of Blades is back. Having once again cheated death, our objective is clear. We must kill him again. However, in order to activate the Bronze Gate and face Jack of Blades, we need to get the souls of 3 heroes. And this is where we get some morality choices. We can either kill our hero friends and use their souls, or we can go on quests to find the souls of already deceased heroes and use those instead. We can pay a visit to Thunder, who never really liked us, and we can take his soul, or we can go to the arena and fight for another warrior's soul instead. The easier option is undoubtedly to seize living souls, but in order to acquire already deceased hero souls, there's usually a bit more meat to it, as is always the case with righteous choices in reality. But not to worry, the arena segment in this is much shorter than it is earlier on in the game, thankfully, so emerging victorious is far less tedious than it might have been earlier. The second soul, we have the choice of either killing Briar Rose on the spot, or visiting Mother's grave in Oakvale and seizing hers instead. She doesn't put up any fight whatsoever, but you do have to clear out some wraiths, which is relatively easy in the grand scheme of things at this point. As for the final soul we must gather, we can return to the guild and kill the guild master and take his soul, or we can visit the graveyard we used to access a secret passage into Bargate Prison earlier on in the game and take the soul of Nostro instead. And with all three souls, we're finally ready to face Jack of Blades and put an end to his shenanigans once and for all.
I don't know what form Jack's going to take, but I don't think it's going to be small and furry, do you?
So off we jolly well trot. And of course, Jack is no longer a man, but rather a bloody dragon. Because being reincarnated as a chicken is overrated anyway, but I feel as if Lionhead Studios missed a massive opportunity there. Compared to the earlier Jack of Blades boss fight, this time around, it's remarkably straightforward. Just wait for Jack to land and go to town. Using this method, you're probably going to take a fair whack of damage, but provided you have tons of resurrection files and or plenty of food and health potions to keep you going, you shouldn't face any issues at all, really. While he's flying about in the air, deal with his goons as best as you can. But like I said, provided you've maxed out everything, this fight is really not difficult in the slightest. Though I imagine on the harder difficulty setting of the two, that might be slightly different. With Jack defeated, we draw his soul back to the mask, where we're faced with one final choice. We can either put the mask on, or we can throw it away, destroying both it and Jack of Blades once and for all. Of course, the morally good choice is to throw the mask away and destroy it, but if you chose to wear it, you would become Jack of Blades. But I'm a good boy, so I didn't do that.
It was a battle that will be talked about for centuries to come. The day the hero of Oakvale slew the dragon Jack of Blades. The day the strange creature behind the mask was finally banished from this world. And this is where our tale must end. Though even the most hopeful of hearts knew the struggle between good and evil would never be truly over. As for what became of the guild and its heroes, that is a story for another time.
And with that, the credits roll. Fable Anniversary is concluded. Though I'm far more familiar with Fable 2 and 3, Fable Anniversary, in my mind, though I'm largely more unfamiliar with this game than I am 2 and 3, boasts a fair few advantages. The in-game economy isn't mangled, or at least as mangled, and that's one example, but the big one is how it actually conducts its storytelling. All Fable main storylines take themselves a little bit more seriously than the rest of the world is constructed to portray. The absurdity of the Fable universe keeps these narratives light-hearted whilst exploring interesting, deep, and perhaps sometimes dark plot points. And I feel as if Fable Anniversary does this perhaps to a greater degree than Fable 2 and 3. And that's because unlike 2 and 3, its narrative remembers to be climactic. Yes, at times it's a bit goofy, very goofy even, but it feels purposeful. In Fable Anniversary, and by extension probably Fable 1 to a decent degree, you can see how the Fable franchise developed into 2 and 3. And you can also see what was changed, sometimes for the better, other times not so much. There are some aspects that every single Fable game gets right, such as the humour. There are other aspects that Fable 1 gets right, but 2 and 3 really don't. The big one being a very interesting main antagonist that has a presence throughout the narrative, and there are aspects that Fable Anniversary / Fable 1 don't get right that later installments perhaps do. And at the same time, there are some aspects that Fable has just never quite gotten the hang of. Fable Anniversary, or shall we say Fable 1, is the blueprint for Fable's potent identity that many players know it for. And though it's not my personal favourite of the Fable games, when looking at it a bit more objectively, which is completely useless when it comes to opinions, but we're going there anyway, it feels like the better gaming experience. It actually feels like it has rewarding progression through overcoming genuine challenge that is just missing in 2 and 3. And while there are many elements from across the Fable trilogy that I would love to see continue and carry on into Playground Games' Fable that's coming out at some point between now and my funeral, I feel as if, at least with regards to many of those elements, it's difficult to understand why they are the way that they are without playing Fable 1. So if the new Fable is something of a soft reboot, as is probably a safe bet, it's a new studio and all that stuff, I feel as if understanding the importance of elements in the first Fable is perhaps more crucial than, say, doing the same for 2 and 3, though there's certainly significance to doing that as well. I'm apprehensive about what comes next for the Fable franchise because its identity is both incredibly particular and very powerful. Whilst the Fable games have always been something of a chaotic mess, the games have always had a very clear design philosophy of being just really good fun. So whatever happens with this new Fable game, I really hope that it just doesn't lose sight of that, and everything else is just bonus points. So to cap off this video, is Fable 1/Anniversary the best Fable game? In my mind, it isn't important. What is important is to remember that without Fable 1, the Fable franchise I know and love just simply wouldn't exist. As for what comes next, whether or not it lives up to that, we'll have to wait and see. So in conclusion, Fable 1/Anniversary is a 0 out of 10 because you can't cripple the economy by making pies and you don't get a complimentary dog. But all jokes aside, thank you all for watching this nonsensical video. I'll see you soon.